So we're live and in living color. Great. So um, while clearly giving you guys the rundown, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you News Talk for being patient and rebroadcasting us. That's really supportive of you. And just wanted everybody to know that I encourage everybody to watch livestream.com News Talk. It's one of our partner stations, and they have news and views on most of the day. While we're not live, they tend to be live. So that is what we want to do. So why is this little thing hung up? There we go. Um, so I want to thank them for being patient with us tonight. Also, welcome to any other channels that are catching us. We're really lucky and fortunate to have Mr. Patrick Murfin, who is a writer and a blogger, historian, and in his own words, he's a funny-looking guy with a long commitment to social justice, peace, civil rights, and other causes. And I will say, too, having read his blog, an incredibly interesting collector of historical information. And we'll be putting the links up as we always do. And I encourage you guys to read Patrick's blog. It is extremely informative, and he covers a lot of territory. So, Patrick, thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for all your patience in working out the
Okay,
technical stuff.
thank you. I would like to plug my blog entry of the day, which is about the Tulsa riots of 1921, a little-known portion of a thing in American history that is eye-opening to anybody that is interested in race relations in this country and how we got here. It's a little-known story, but one that needs to be told.
And just so the people know, if you haven't looked at Patrick's blog, you can find items like that buried throughout it, and they're well researched and very informative. So I think we can start out by giving us a little bit of an introduction to yourself, Patrick. You know, what your background is, where you come from, where you headed, and some of your life experience to give us a little bit of context for what we're about to talk about.
All right. I was born in Montana, in the Missouri Breaks area of the western Montana in 1949, and adopted with a twin brother at birth, and was brought up by my parents mostly in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Thus, the quaint native peasant costume, which I continue to adopt to this day. I was sort of an oddball kid, like a lot of folks, and kind of bookish. Not a good thing necessarily in Cheyenne, but I enjoyed living out there. We moved to Skokie, Illinois when I was in high school, which was a major, for those that know Skokie, it used to be described as the Gilded Ghetto. It was a very largely Jewish community, but which welcomed with open arms a bookish kid, which was a good thing. I sort of wandered in through the back door of being interested in social justice through being in a play about I called Inherit the Wind, where I was cast as the William Jennings Bryan character, largely because I was large and had a Western accent. But that led me to Darrow, and Darrow led me to the labor movement, and the labor movement led me to socialism and the IWW. Within a few years, I went to college, but within a few years, I was living in Chicago. I joined the Industrial Workers of the World, was a very active member for several years. Served in many positions within the IWW. Was the editor of the newspaper for a while. Co-wrote a history of the IWW with Fred Thompson. Was General Secretary Treasurer of the Union when I was 23 years old, and quite incapable of filling Big Bill Haywood's chair. In the interim, I also had worked. I was also a Vietnam era draft resistor. I had participated in the demonstrations, in many demonstrations, but particularly the demonstrations in Chicago during the Democratic Convention in 1968. and I worked on a Chicago underground newspaper called The Seed. So and my life since then has been, I got married, raised family, moved out to the boonies, far northwest metropolitan area of Chicago and McHenry County, and have tried to keep my hand involved in things, but it's just a little different than being in the city. I blog. I'm active as in all sorts of local activities promoting peace, justice, labor movement, civil rights. I do a lot of that through the Unitarian Universalist congregation around here. And I'm also, I know this will offend some folks who listen to this program, an active Democrat, and have even run for office locally out here and been whooped. And I do that, I say I do that because being an electoral politician is playing defense. Things like Occupy Chicago are playing offense, and I do both.
Excellent. Well, that gives us kind of a good picture. It it's interesting. One of the people have already commented that says, to think that all that started from a play that made an impact on you and just took you down that path. It's very, very commendable. So, I was wondering if you could care to expound a little bit on some of the highlights of your activist history. And as we spoke or through emails and what we've been communicating, our goal is to kind of get a sense of what your perception of activist history in the United States has been, and then compared and contrasted to the current day Occupy movements and also in any other movements related to social justice. So we want to see that through your lens. So start us out with what some of your early activism operations were.
I'd like to tell a story through go to that sort of back. I'd like to tell a favorite story of mine that I learned from Fred W. Thompson, who was my mentor in the IWW. Fred was born in 1900 on Prince Edward Island up in Canada, and he had when he was 16, 17 years old, he went down to Nova Scotia. Joined the Socialist Party down there and became an activist on the Halifax docks. As a matter of fact, so much of an activist that when the docks in Halifax went on strike in 1918, in the middle of World War I, the RCMP blamed it all on 17-year-old Fred Thompson. But Fred, when he first got there, got to know an old socialist, a Scotsman, who could remember as a boy the Chartist rebellion in England in the 1840s and being attacked by cavalry for protesting for workers' rights. Fred was moved by this fellow who stretched back to 1840 something. Fred Thompson went on to a long career in the IWW. Spent a stretch in prison for criminal syndicalism in California. Became a great scholar of the labor movement and my personal mentor, the best man at my wedding. But between that old Scotsman and Fred Thompson and I, we linked 100, almost 200 years of labor history and experience. And I point that out because it's a continual struggle no matter where we are in the world. And if you took that back, that old Scotsman connected someplace back himself, maybe back to Wat Tyler. And hopefully, in some small way, maybe I connected forward to younger people, and we can participate in this continuum of action for social justice. It's not there. It is not the kind of thing that is ever won. It is not the kind of thing that is ever lost. It's a continuing struggle that adapts itself over time. We do not and should not try and imitate or carbon copy those that come before us because our circumstances are different. But we can be inspired by them, and we can do the same thing that they did, which is reinvent that struggle continuously to meet the current needs, the current situation that we're at, which is always different and is always evolving and is influenced by technology and population shifts and demographics and a million other things. But we are conscious that it's one long struggle and that we are called to face it in our time, in our own way. The biggest mistake we can make is to try and slavishly copy the rule books that were written down by philosophers, whether it's Karl Marx or Bakunin or Thomas Jefferson or anybody else. We can learn from those people, but we cannot be bound by how they tried to create the revolution in their time, because we have to do it in our own time, in our own way, within that great tradition.
That's so well said, and I think the point there is a lot of times, this is the Occupy movement is predominantly a youth-driven movement, and we're dealing with things that these are not new issues. These are 2,000-year-old issues, and it's helpful to remember that and to be able to stay focused and keep on top of it. So 49. So you were coming of age in the late 50s, post Eisenhower.
I was a pre-teenager, but I was very aware of the world. I for some reason, I was a news junkie by the time as long as I could remember. I can remember shortly after we got television. We got television late in Cheyenne because it's out there in the boonies. But I remember being transfixed by watching coverage of the national political conventions. With Walter Cronkite in a little box in a corner. I remember hearing about the time when when American troops landed in Lebanon, which I think was 1958 or something like that. I paid attention to all that stuff. I don't know why. I was a strange child, but I did pay attention to it. I absorbed it. As we moved into the 60s, I was out there in Cheyenne, but I was transfixed with the civil rights movement and followed it very closely. And I think then that certainly had a huge effect on me. Many of my greatest heroes remain to this day. Martin Luther King, but also, and this is always important, not just the big names, but you learn that behind those big names are always hundreds, thousands of ordinary human beings whose names we don't know, who sacrificed incredibly in very dangerous situations to make those changes. Mm-hmm. Those kind of things always inspire me. It's good to know the heroes, it's good to know the speeches, but never forget that behind the heroes and the speeches are all of those ordinary, those old sharecroppers, those teachers, those, in many cases, high school students and junior high school students and great grandmothers who put their heads in the way of batons and gas and dogs. What an awesome thing they did, and how awesomely inspiring that they are to me as the labor movement, as I later came to understand it, also inspired me.
The imagery that you're describing there is so powerful. Were you able to actively participate in some of the civil rights marches?
Well, when we moved from, there wasn't a lot of civil rights marching in Cheyenne.
Yeah, yeah, I can
Uh,
imagine.
although I did remember honoring a single picketer up around a Walgreens when I went for my every Saturday morning. Used to go to Walgreens for a Coke. But there was one time there was a single picketer out there in support of the lunch counter programs.
Hmm.
But when we moved to Skokie when I was in high school, was about the time that Dr. King was coming north to Chicago, and I did participate as a completely naive and incredibly stupid young kid. Hopped on a Skokie Swift and an L and went to participate in the open housing march at in Marquette Square, Marquette Park, which turned out to be a riot, a white riot against the open housing. So that was, I was there. I was petrified. I was I was totally unaffiliated, and no one knew who the hell I was. But I can say that at least once I marched with Dr. King on a civil rights. I later also marched in the big anti-war demonstrations in Chicago that he was a part of, and was able to actually meet him just briefly at the New Politics Convention in 1967, August of 1967, which was a convention of I tried to bring all elements of the left, from the left wing of the Democratic Party all the way to all the communist sects together at one place to try and iron out a commonality. Well, that didn't work, but I did have a chance to actually meet Dr. King at that event. I was the youngest delegate there,
Right.
representing a high school group from Niles West.
Yeah. Well, that gives me a little bit of a chance to segue that little bit of information there, that you were involved as a high school student in trying to build commonalities between various activist groups. And this was in 67, 68, if I caught that right, somewhere around there.
That would have been 67, yeah,
Yeah.
1967.
So,
The fall of 67, I went to college and came back to Chicago next year for the festivities of the Democratic Convention.
right. Well, tell us a little bit about this gathering to try to, create cooperation between all the groups, and kind of what that was like. You said it
It
wasn't
was,
successful. Was it
well,
contentious? Was it?
successful. It was successful in some ways. They got a lot of interesting folks in one place. It was a project that was put together by some folks associated with SDS, and they happened to be operating out of a community organization storefront called 49th Ward Citizens for Independent Political Action in Chicago. The 49th Ward is on the far north side of Chicago, and just south of Evanston. So, and it would happen to be the place where I would, if I went into the city, switched between the Skokie Swift and the L to the city. I ended up in that office, and I got into as a curious young guy, and the people who were setting that meeting up were working out of it. So they called this convention. Some people were under the impression that maybe there was going to be a new political party formed. Some people went there thinking that they were going to create a new communist party. Everyone was wrong. What happened was everybody brought together their own agendas. We hashed out many different things in various workshops. No one agreed to do the community organizing people, the electoral people, and the 29,000 different varieties of Marxists, each of whom hated the ones closest to them more than they hated the capitalists. They're couldn't get together on a significant program, but we made a try, and we did learn from each other. I can't. It's an event that will have absolutely no significance in history because nothing happened there. Essentially, it was uh, the things that happened politically on the left happened completely outside that attempt. But it was an attempt.
Right. And a valid attempt too at that day and time. And so within the next year or so, you were, and we're just the chatters are all just going, oh my God, it's the same thing that happens today. I mean, it's the same thing that happens today. It's somebody asks, when or how are we ever going to change because we keep repeating the same processes. So maybe it's incremental, I don't know, or maybe one day a miracle is going to occur. But the next year, the following year, '68 was the convention in Chicago, and you were there at that, active in in that. So won't you give us
Yeah.
a little? And so, did you happen to go down to Chicago for the actions a couple of weeks ago, the NATO actions, or were you
No,
okay?
actually, because I am kind of a fat old fart. Also, because I have I actually have hold down two jobs to make a living for my family,
Okay.
and one of them is a sort of overnight shifts at a gas station up here in Crystal Lake. I didn't get down there, and I would like to, and I would at some point I'd like to join in. I have not been to the big demonstrations in Chicago. We've done support work in McHenry County,
Uh-huh.
things like gathering supplies for Occupy Chicago and presenting educational programs. But I'm no longer a frontline troop.
Hmm.
I'm now what the IWW used to call a home guard.
No,
That means
and
I'm no longer
I
the
want to come
footloose
back
guy.
to that point too. So don't let me forget
Yeah.
it. I want to talk some more about that. But so tell us a little bit about Chicago in '68.
Well, I had uh, that summer I was working in a factory in Skokie, but I had also was also going to taking classes with Stoughton Lind at the Free University at Roosevelt University, and Stoughton wanted to use our class to do a study of the upcoming events. And so I volunteered stupidly and not knowing a thing to we sort of assigned people different things. And I said I would check out the Yippies. So one night I got on the train and went down to Chicago. And I didn't know I wouldn't have known Abby Hoffman from a hole in the ground. The only thing I did know was at the Chicago Sea, the underground newspaper, which had an office on LaSalle Street, was probably where I was going to find a Yippie. So I went in on a very hot night, a couple of weeks before the convention, and I found three guys in there, and I announced, "Hi, I want to talk to Abby Hoffman." And they must have looked me up and down, and decided pretty quickly that I was a spy, I suspect. I was a pretty straight-looking kid. I had a little long hair, not too much. I was wearing a white shirt, white short sleeve shirt. I did have the cowboy hat on and some cowboy boots, but they probably didn't know what to make of me. But they gave me some flyers announcing some events, but they didn't give me much encouragement. I could have been talking to Abby Hoffman personally, I wouldn't have known it at that time. At the convention itself, I came down late Saturday night before the convention started, and I through some of the same people that did that 49th Ward SEPA people, I signed on to be a staff person at what they called a movement center for high school students that was at a Methodist church on Diversity. That's so the high school students around the country could come in and have a place to sleep, and we would feed them and stuff like that. So that was sort of my base for the for the entire convention. And I was the only person there that wasn't an SDSer. The only reason I wasn't an SDS was because Shimer College, where I went to school, didn't have a chapter. Otherwise, I probably would have been. But and it turned out to be my goal, and some of the people they would later on turn out to be weathermen, several of whom blew themselves up, townhouse in New York City a year and a half later. But that was then, and they weren't at that point at that time. I was involved in almost every action of that week, starting with Sunday when the first attempt to hold the park was held, and I'd also volunteered and was trained as a marshal, and one of my jobs was supposedly to intercede between the police and the demonstrators, which we did as the crowd was being pushed out of Lincoln Park on Sunday night. There had been quite a bit of scuffling and some head banging. The crowd was pushed into Old Town, and I thought that it had dispersed. So I started walking back to my movement center, about 3 miles north up Lincoln Avenue, and discovered that while I was walking north, most of the people in the crowd had reformed in Old Town and begun a night-long battle in the streets of Old Town, in which the neighborhood was filled with tear gas, and people were beaten on their front steps. I just blithely walked out of that. I had that kind of week. I never got hit once, and I was very good about learning how to stay upwind of the tear gas. But I was there on several for several of the big events, particularly Wednesday afternoon at the band shell, where the police attacked a rally at the band shell, and then moving on that night to the Battle of Michigan Avenue in Chicago, on Michigan Avenue in front of the Conrad Hilton, where I was standing on the sidewalk right across the street on Balboa, right across the street from the Hilton, when the phalanx of Chicago police literally marched right past me and into the main crowd at Michigan and Balboa for the famous beating that was administered on live television, and is remembered as the whole world is watching
Right.
campaign. So that was a heck of a week, and I've written considerably about some memoir stories about that week, which have been published on my blog and can be found if you search for them. Several almost day-to-day stories about that time.
Yep. I'd like to interrupt with a couple of questions. So there were these actions that were planned and happening all during the week. Was the sense of it that the protests were organized and relatively peaceful, or was there a sense that the protesters were looking to provoke a reaction, or just how did all that come about?
All of the above.
Yeah, just a mess,
all
huh?
of the above. There was not a monolithic thing. The new mobilization, the new mob, had envisioned a relatively traditional program of mass marches and protests and rallies, and they all week long tried to adhere to that. The Yippies had an entirely different agenda. It wasn't exactly provocative, but it was to be. Well, it was provocative, but it wasn't. I don't think it was designed to be
violent.
To be the kind of street fighting that became fashionable later. But it was intended to be in your face. It was intended to show the face of repression. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, we know now that there were at most 5,000 or 6,000 demonstrators in Chicago that week. Although, if you ask the question, like similar to who was at Woodstock. You'll find about 1 million people were there, but there were about 5,000 or 6,000 people, maybe 10,000 if you put people who came at least one day for the entire week. It's now estimated that probably 20% of those people were some kind of police agents,
Really?
either or informers. And this is a valuable lesson that the Occupy movement also needs to be aware of, because things have not changed. If they're not actual police agents or FBI agents or informers, they're always there. They're always Fred Thompson, my friend, said told me one time how to detect an agent. He says he's the guy that brings the dynamite.
Good. That's a good point.
He's the agent or the provocateur is almost always turns out to be the person who is at the flash point. I remember most famously and absolutely proven was at the band shell on the afternoon of the Wednesday afternoon, when the American flag was hauled down and a Viet Cong flag was hoisted, which was the precipitating event for the famous police charge that pinned so many people up against the seating at the band shell. Well, the supposed yippie that hoisted that flag was later identified as a police provocateur. It was absolutely, this wasn't suspicion. They identified who he was. So as I observe from a distance things that happen in the Occupy movement around the country, I know it isn't popular in some circumstances to bring that up, but people need to be aware and of those possibilities. And I am, despite having been something of an anarchist myself as a youth, am not necessarily enthralled with the black bloc tactics. However many people in that are sincere, about at least almost as many of them are probably agents, frankly. And I think that's been. I think that recent events in Chicago and the arrest of some of those people, on the word of agents who had infiltrated the movement, show that to be true. The powers that be want to be able to bring down these movements by making them appear to be violent and dangerous. Right. Yeah, and when those things happen, it opens the gate to public acceptance of greater repression.
Well, and therein lies the importance of history, so we can reflect and we can be aware. And I'm glad you brought that up, because there's a lot of conversation around that. These days, revolution versus reform. What's the purpose / value of black bloc? How effective are they? What's the degree of infiltration, and all those sorts of things. And so you're placing it in a context that 45 years ago, these were the same questions. The labels changed, but the questions remained the same. So 67, 68 was really an active time for you. You were a young man. And you shared one lesson already that you learned from that, but what was your overall overarching life lessons you learned from the experiences of those years as you moved forward into the 70s?
Well, one of the things that happened to me during that week was I got actually introduced to the Industrial Workers. The World had their headquarters in Chicago, not very far. Some folks from the IWW came over to my movement center and invited me over because they had leftover food from their picnic. And I was taken up to a dusty old hall and introduced to several elderly men who entranced me with their stories. But I left convinced that they were onto something, but that it was too bad it was all part of history. I was also working as a, I was working in factories myself when I wasn't in school, but within a few months and some study, I became more and more convinced that what was really needed was a labor movement in this country that was far different than what we'd had, and I was drawn back into the IWW, and as I could fight for the same ideals about the war and civil rights through a new battlefield, and that is trying to reinvigorate the labor movement um, in new ways. Now, the IWW in those years was a vital part of the left, but I can't say we're anywhere in the country where things were going on. Chances are IWW branches were involved, and that's true today. Even in the Occupy movement, I know that there are wobblies all over the place, around the country doing that. But we were a presence on the left. Like we obviously failed to ignite a mass labor movement, but I did learn a lot from that, and coming under the tutelage of Fred Thompson, I learned a great deal about the labor movement and what it had gone through, and that reinforced a lot of my conclusions about social change and how it can be accomplished. Sort of separately from that, of course, I was also ensnared in the as a late victim of the draft. I had been taken out of the draft lottery while I was investigated as a subversive, largely because of my IWW activity, and then been put back in the draft and was actually drafted in late 1972 and refused induction in December 72 and went to prison in 73 as the war was for Americans was virtually over. I spent a couple of months in Cook County Jail awaiting transfer to federal custody because all the federal marshals in the world were off shooting Indians that wounded me, and I was stuck in Cook County Jail. And then finished my time at Sandstone, Minnesota. I can't say I did a heavy time. I was only in jail for a total of about 6 months in prison, which was long enough. And when I returned, I resumed my IWW activities, and I also went to work for the Chicago Seed, which was the underground newspaper in Chicago, where I was part of their operation under the name Wobbly Murph.
And are the Wobblies still a viable organization in this day and time?
Well, actually, they're much more viable today than they were in my day. I thought we were recreated, and they are much more active. They have more job site work. They're around the world. They have strong activities in Australia and Britain, even in Africa. I think you will find, if you go to Occupy movements around the country, that some of the most deeply involved people are IWW people. It's a natural. I think it's a natural part of the philosophy that comes out of the IWW of direct action based on direct democracy, the decision-making power of the people themselves, not empowering parties or leaders. It was in fact, I think you'll find I've seen photographs after photographs of IWW participation in events all over the country, and I know people have been so even in the early days of the Occupy movement in New York, a lot of those people were IWW. So they're very involved.
Oh,
And much more together than we were. The young mobs today are much more together than
Oh,
we were
really?
in the 60s and 70s.
So it's
Yes.
improved organizationally over time. That's an optimistic, statement. I'm glad to hear that. Um,
Yeah,
so
everyone look them up. They're industrial workers of the world, not international workers of the world.
right.
Industrial workers of the world, IWW, look them up.
We'll we'll do that. So as a obviously a pretty committed union guy, what's your observation of the union's efforts since the 70s to current days? Have we made progress? Are we losing ground? Is it cyclical? Or, what's your read on that from a historical
It's
perspective?
taken a long time. It's taken a long time for the labor movement to adjust to the new realities. Partially because after the Taft-Hartley Act in the 1950s, there was this enormous purge of leftists out of the labor movement and the business the combination of business union mentality and also, as Fred Thompson, again, my mentor, used to say, when there isn't a leftist, there's often there's often a gangster. So there was the labor movement really suffered for decades, and then as its base in heavy industry began to fall apart, it suffered even more. What I find it interesting is the ongoing attempts by the labor movement, which have accelerated over the last 15 to 20 years, to readjust. The numbers under representation continue to fall because the traditional base of the labor movement in heavy industry is falling, although their numbers rise in public employment. But what is happening is that people in the labor movement have become aware of this, and they've been trying to find ways of adapting. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully. There have been all sorts of experiments. The Unite Here was a promising experiment that failed. There's a lot of new energy into trying to find ways of organizing those who are not traditionally organizable. There is a growing militancy, and around the country, labor unions, including some relatively traditionally conservative unions, have shown up and marched in support of the Occupy movement in many places around the country. Largely because they see their movement under attack in places like Wisconsin, and I think the events in Wisconsin, starting in the months several months earlier than Occupy Wall Street, were key. It may be even historically more important to that development. So what I think is happening is something I've been talking about and writing about for quite a while, is that there is a growing awareness that the labor movement needs to reinvent itself, and it's done this many times in the past. We're no longer in medieval guilds. We're no longer in craft unions divided amongst in different crafts. We've gone to the stage where we have had industrial unions. We've gone to this. In other countries they've had workers' councils and Soviets and all sorts of and political parties and all sorts of organs for the working class. We can learn from all of those, but the new labor movement, which I have great hopes for, is going to arise when it is reinvented from the bottom up by the people who recognize the conditions on the ground today. It will resemble the traditional labor movement in some ways, and in some ways it will be organizationally so different that it will scare the crap out of those who are deeply attached to their dogmatic predictions of how the revolution is going to happen. I see a lot of hope for that. I think organically the Occupy movement in its potential alliance with rank and file workers is a big step in making that reinvention happen. It's the most hopeful thing I've seen in my long period of activism.
Well, that's yet another optimistic statement, and we're glad to hear that. We have several of our guests that are deeply involved in unions and union activism and organizers, and we've had a chance to talk to. And it's good to hear that the unions seem to be somewhat monolithic in their organizational structure, but there's always some conversation about the undercurrent of change, from the bottom up. And I think that's only a positive move. Also, you touched on Wisconsin. The recall election is next week, and I think it's going to be one of the most politically important decisions we see. It's interesting. I'm looking at Wisconsin, and they're like a proving ground for things. They have the occupation of the state capitol before Occupy, and now they're doing the recall. So if the recall succeeds, that sends a message to progressives. If it fails, that sends another message, but something's going to happen. It's going to change the dynamic, no doubt, no matter which way it goes.
We're not far from the Wisconsin border here in McHenry County. We're the county just south of the border. So, and we have lots of connections up there. So, I'm also, I'm also, as I said, an active Democrat. So I'm also aware of the political ramifications up there. It is important. The recall election is going to be extremely close. It's going to be won on the ground, which I think is good because they will, with the oppositions, which has got unlimited funds, will spend unlimited funds. But there is an army of folks on the ground. And in good old-fashioned shoe leather meets pavement organization, which in some ways is 19th century politics. The ability to mobilize the people on a one-to-one conversational, on your doorstep basis. I think that there's a good chance that the recall will succeed. The polls shift from day to day, and depending on who's paying the pollsters, and a lot depends on who is motivated to vote. We know that the right wing has traditionally been willing to crawl through glass to get to the polls, and have often won in many elections when they were an obvious minority, because the left and the middle have not had that kind of commitment. There is, as a matter of fact, the fashionable cynicism, which is the trademark of the modern liberal, has discouraged the commitment it takes, to make electoral politics work. The question is, can we reinvigorate that? I'm one of those people that believes we have to engage in political activity largely on a defensive level to keep the bastards from getting more power, but we do need to do that kind of political work, and we need to match commitment to commitment. I know a lot of folks in the Occupy movement are appalled by that, and I'm sorry about that, but we need to do both kinds of things. They should not be mutually exclusive, and I have no trouble being yelled at by both sides, and I have been denounced by both sides and called a hypocrite by both sides, because I support both practical electoral efforts on one hand and forward-looking, on-the-street militancy on the other.
Right.
There's room for both. We have to have both.
Right. So I want to go down this path a little bit because this is something near and dear to my heart, and you just touched on it. So my observation in working in our arena with OPN and in contact with all these groups, most of them liberal and progressive groups, and Wisconsin specifically lately, and the Charlotte, because of the DNC and all that. My observation is the conservatives are much better funded. I think you can beat the
They will always
funding.
be better funded.
You can beat the funding by better organization, but my experience
That's right.
is that the conservatives are also better organized. They have a plan, they have a system, they work it, it's been in place longer, and we progressives have trouble getting our act together. And
But
that
the
concerns
conservatives,
me.
the conservatives mastered some years ago unanimity of message. And, the marching orders go out from whatever secret bunker they go out of, and the next day they're all marching together and all saying the same thing. There's something to be said for that fascist-like thing. The left is far more diverse. It is made up oftentimes of interest groups who are interested in their own slice of the pie, and are not particularly good about connecting with the slice next door. But we do have the capacity, and historically have shown the capacity to overcome that. We'll never be monolithic. We can make our diversity a strength if we can commit to respecting each other and supporting each other and not nitpicking each other to death. The left is so willing to abandon each other at the slightest deviation from perfection, and go and stomp off in a huff, as pure as the driven snow, to melt in the first ray of sunshine the next day. We don't have to do that. And historically, there have been times when the left has not done that. And I'm not talking about phony popular fronts or any of that crap. I'm talking about common sense and respect. We have a lot in common. We have a lot we can do. We have a tremendous amount of energy in this country right now, more than any time in the last 50 years. We have the opportunity, and we have the communication skills that none of us ever had before, and the sophistication to use those skills like you're using them. We have a tremendous opportunity, and we just have to acknowledge that and move forward. We don't always have to agree. We can tactically disagree. We can strategically disagree. But we do need to have each other's back, and we do need to put the effort onto the streets, whether it's electoral or whether it's a confrontational direct action. Either place, both places, we need commitment and solidarity.
That was well spoken. So, really quickly, can you give 3 quick examples of how we as activists and regular people can help to cultivate that mindset of cooperation?
The biggest thing we can do is refrain from jumping all over each other. We're going to have disagreements, and they're healthy and they're fine, but we just have to not, resist the urge to pick up our toys and go home, because believe me, those tendencies will be exacerbated and the fires will be fanned by those who want to see us fail. And time again, you'll find in history where the provocateurs fan those differences. So that's the biggest thing any of us can do. Let's not stare at each other. Let's move forward with some respect. The second thing is that wherever you are, whether you're in a big city, whether you're on a college campus, whether you're in a small town exurb like I am, is to look around and find how the best way that you can become engaged where you are. You don't have to, no one has to cross the country to Oakland or New York or Charlotte. There are many opportunities in every community, and the actions that we take will be very different depending on the community, where it is, what it needs, what the issues are, and how we can best address those.
Mm-hmm.
Those can be addressed by good old-fashioned community organizing, by insurgent electoral politics sometimes, by demonstrations and local Occupy movements in some of these smaller towns. It can be done a lot of ways, but look around and find how you can engage where you are. Build communities where you are, and let those communities that we build in each of our towns and villages and cities link to a broader movement. Let's build this thing from the bottom up. Let's not wait for marching orders and be told how to do it. Look around. The opportunities are there. Find your allies. Go to those tiresome meetings. Work out a plan. Do it.
That we should make a poster and make it required reading. Thank you for that. So, really quick, I want to touch on a couple of other things. I don't want to take up your whole evening, but this is fascinating, and I'm enjoying it seriously. Can you give us just a quick overview on your perception of how Occupy is doing, what their biggest challenge is moving forward?
Well, the Occupy movement is a very local and disorganized thing in some ways, which is all right. I mean, it varies from place to place. It is if people think it all sort of founds from Occupy Wall Street, but I have always referred to the Occupy movement, not to Occupy Wall Street and all these other things, because it's really a broad-based movement. Many healthy things are happening. It was always going to be impossible to physically maintain physical occupation of territory over the long term. And I think everybody has recognized that. And I think where the Occupy movement is the strongest is where it's adapted to new ways of occupying the consciousness and the conscience of the people, of confronting authority and abuse in creative ways. Whether it's opposing and preventing evictions, whether it's actions in schools, there's all sorts of highly creative things they're doing. Now the media won't recognize what these things are because they don't always look like 100,000 people in the streets. Mm-hmm. But they can be far more important in the long run to knitting together the kind of common community from which the movement can grow. And I see a lot of growth in that direction. The Occupy Chicago movement, I think, has done very well in identifying ways to reorient itself in the face of this new reality. And I know that in New York City as well, there's a lot of activity. On the West Coast, I see that Oakland officially disassociated itself from the Occupy movement, predominantly because I guess that locally they're more committed to to a more street confrontational approach, then I think is probably going to work well. But let's see how they do following that path. Um, I have a lot of hope for the Occupy movement going forward. If people do not get discouraged because they don't see those massive marches on every day, and remember that it's an ongoing struggle, it has tremendous potential to succeed.
Great. It was a really, I like the coast to coast observation you made there. So what I'd like to do, if you have a few more minutes, is I'd like you to speak to solidarity, because that was the first piece I read of yours. And we use that word a lot these days. And I think it would be really nice to have some context and overview of that. And so we'll kind of wrap with that, and then we'll take a few questions from the chat stream if you have time for that.
Sure. I did a piece called the working class virtue of solidarity. It was actually a sermon because for my Unitarian Universalist folks. But it was basically about what solidarity is and is not. It's a different kind of a virtue than other things. Solidarity is the notion that we have reciprocal responsibilities to each other. It is not charity. It is not blind allegiance to a tribal entity. It is not given or received from differentiations in power. You cannot confer solidarity on the lower classes as a gift, nor can you have it, nor can it be done in any way except as an act amongst equals. Solidarity demands support for each other. It demands respect for each other. It demands reciprocality. That which we do for you today, we expect you to be able to do for us tomorrow. Those virtues are so unique that they are very different than other kinds of political expressions. And we do well when we build solidarity across communities, starting in local communities, either at work or in communities, and building that solidarity brick by brick in ever widening circles. Because when we can express solidarity for each other in action, then we are our strongest. That's essentially my take on solidarity in 30 seconds.
That was really good. Thank you for that. So somebody's pinging you, it sounds like.
Yeah, I don't know what yeah, someone's pinging me, but I will kind of ignore it.
Yeah. Well, we can hear the beep every time it beeps.
Yeah, so can I. I'm so new to this messenger service that I don't even recognize what some of these things are.
Yeah, I want everybody that's watching and all the other channels to know how hard Patrick worked to be able to be on with us tonight. I know for a fact he was up until 2:30 in the morning working with Clearly last night trying to get set up, and then he and I got on tonight and threw together a cobbled together kind of methodology to do it, but it's working good. So we really appreciate your effort, and it was, honest to God, it was worth, from our side, it was worth every bit of time we spent on it. So if you guys want to, can you paste the questions up again for me, then pause the chat so I can read them off? I'm sorry, this is the third time I've asked for that to be done. So Patrick, while they're putting those up for me to read off to you, you got any closing thoughts, any comments or suggestions? This is kind of what we refer to as our soapbox time, so if you got a message you want to give, put it out there.
I I appreciate what you're doing, and it's because it's so important. Part of reinventing the working class is reinventing the ways we communicate with each other, and the ways we build bonds and solidarity. I'm a technological idiot. I managed to do a little simple blogging and stuff like that, but what you folks are doing, and what the amazing street journalists what the Occupy movement are doing, with so many people reinventing every day, um, the circumvention of the media oligarchs that tell us what to think. I just want to commend you and everyone else involved in that effort, because it is so important. And without it, it is, when I started in the movement, I was cranking an A.B. Dick open drum mimeograph hand crank machine, and handing out leaflets on street corners, and it would take me 6 weeks to organize an event. Now we can organize I've personally participated in organizing a major event in 36 hours. Uh, Boy, what an opportunity technology has given us.
Yep. We're very fortunate. We're trying to use the tools for good instead of evil, but sometimes it's a challenge. So, a couple of questions. What do you think of worker-owned cooperatives versus working for corporate factories?
Well, I'm all for worker-owned cooperatives. Any expression of worker self-management is fine by me. Uh, and we always regarded those in the IWW as sort of little laboratories for the future. Of how we could of how working people can collaborate with each other and run and manage our own affairs. Now, obviously, some people are going to be able to work and create these cooperatives, and some people are not going to are still going to be in the position of wage slaves. We can't denigrate the struggles of the wage slaves to come to grips with their situation, uh, or denigrate the efforts of those trying to liberate themselves from that situation by creating alternative institutions. We're going to have to work in both places, and again, this is an area where we need to support each other. The wage slaves need to support the cooperativists. The cooperativists need to support the wage slaves. And if I can get a plug in for the IWW, this is an area where the IWW has pioneered and led the way ever since my long time ago membership. They're very good at that.
Okay, and you plug away for IWW or anybody else you want. We're putting the links up so people can reference them. How do you feel? Well, first of all, are you familiar with Senate Bill 5 in Ohio? And how did you feel about the repeal of it and how the union organized to combat it?
Well, it is. You might have to refresh my memory of the exact contents of those bills. They're so hard to keep up with. um, the I have paid less attention maybe to Ohio than I should have. I have been desperately trying to get more information out of Michigan, where some of the worst crap is happening, and unfortunately has not been seeing the high level of organized opposition yet. I see, but I do know folks in Ohio have been responding to various depredations, but I can't comment in detail because I haven't followed that particular case
Right.
closely enough.
It was a collective bargaining bill that was, that
I assume it
eliminated
was,
collective
yeah.
bargaining and the unions organized. Okay. So, are there any more questions coming out of the chat? You have somebody that wants to. That's probably your daughter. You have to say, "Hey, I was on."
No, that's just a notification that that an incoming email. Evidently, when I enabled this instant message, I enabled a stupid system that pings every time I get an incoming email.
It's kind of demanding, huh?
Nuts.
So you're going to be
Nuts.
busy doing emails.
I'll have to figure out how to disable that.
Do you have
I don't
any?
need to be told.
So I'm gonna rephrase this question because I get the point, but we try to not be too divisive here. Um, do you have any ideas of how progressives can change the minds of conservatives?
There, there are conservatives and there are conservatives. There are, I would say, about 30% of folks who are congenitally unchangeable, and they're going to, and that number is always there. They only manifested themselves by their increasing rabidness and their daring empowerment to be louder than ever. No, you're not going to change those people's votes, our opinions. They're set in stone. We do not even speak the same language. We mean different things by the same words. It's been said, a lot of analysis, that we live in different realities. There's no particularly reaching those people. I do think that there are a lot of people, especially working people in this country, who don't know, honestly don't know how to respond to the emergency that they find themselves in. A lot of these people responded to the Tea Party because they felt it gave them their first voice. They knew the great forces were out there manipulating their lives. The Tea Party gave them a voice to vent that anger. It also provided them with a lot of piss poor answers and misdirection. Now those people can be reached. It's not going to be easy because they get conditioned into their new stances. But it is not true that all working people will automatically. This is the arrogance of some of the more highly educated liberal elite. And I'll even use the same term that the right wing uses in this regard. It is not true that it is the doom of the working class, particularly the white working class, to always disregard its own self-interest. If we are clever enough and clear enough, we can refocus their anger to their and reach them with the message of where the real powers are that are destroying their lives and their families. This is the big test. If we do reach those people, we win. If we let them stay in this cesspool that the Tea Party has created because they are not given a clear alternative, then we lose. There's no simple way to do it, but it has to be done, and it has to be done by being very clear, very concise, and repeating often a message about who and what it is that is creating the problems in their lives, the system that is crushing them by attacking their wages, by attacking their futures with Social Security, by attacking their families' health and safety. Why cannot we reach those people, clearly identifying their self-interest as something different?
Right.
It's not easy, but we have to.
I think you're the first person that I always have this theory of thirds, and I say it out loud, and people go, "What are you talking about?" And you just summarized it. There's a third of the people are on either end of the extreme, and it's the middle third we need to speak to because that's where that's where it all lies. Because the third of the conservatives that aren't speaking the same language, you're not going to change their mind. There's a third of progressives over here that already have their mind made up. So it's that middle third that we all need to be speaking to in a clear, inviting manner to get them to want to listen and to help have a productive dialogue. Because I firmly believe that reasonable people, if they will just stop and think, are not going to tolerate what goes on. But they're just people are so brainwashed and so reactive. It's just like if we can get past that and have substantive conversations, then there's hope.
We
So.
cannot be condescending, because there's nothing. One of the biggest ally of the far right oligarchs has been the perception amongst ordinary working people that the cultural elite, this shibboleth of leftist, intellectuals and stuff, sneers at them and disrespects them. And to tell you the truth, that a lot of the things you read out of the New York Times or hear on network television would tend to make you agree.
Mhm.
We have to abandon that, and we have to denounce it. We need to talk to people without condescension, straight from the shoulder, and with respect for their own life experiences. Respect.
And I think that's a great message for us to wind up the evening on. I really appreciate your time and energy you spent on this and your willingness to do it. It has been an absolute delight and so informative and educational. And we'd love to hear more from you sometime now that we know how to do it, right? So we got
All
a
right.
we got a plan and a system. So
As anyone who
go ahead.
anyone who knows me knows that I will bloviate on cue.
Well, that's great. I mean, it was all substantive, and there's so much more. I mean, we just scratched the surface on some of these things, and your observations and your wisdom from your life experience and your suggestions are all extremely helpful and extremely relevant. So what I want you to do is stay on. Don't do anything because what
All
I'm going to
right.
do is say my thank yous and then I'm going to archive this so we can watch it later. I want to thank the OPN production team. Clearly, thanks for putting this one together for us. Zena, thanks for helping me work on all the tech so much. Uppity and Suze, if you're around, thank you for all the work you do. This is a team effort, and it wouldn't happen without the whole group working. I want to thank our forum and News Talk for rebroadcasting this and helping get the message that Patrick brought to us out. And any other channels that were screen capping us tonight, thank you for your participation and support. So, um, Clearly's been putting up the links all night. I really encourage everybody to read Patrick's blog. You'll be glad you did. There's so deep and so much great history there. Thank you, chatters and viewers. I love you all for being here. I think this is a great interview, and we got a lot more in the works. So just stay tuned to our webpage and our Facebook and ticker and all this other stuff that we're going to try to use and tweet and email lists. We try to get the word out. Tell your friends about OPN. Um, Thank you very much, and I'm going to sign off right now and archive this, and I will join you in just a few minutes back on the chat. And everybody's
All right.
asking me to express their thanks, and they love the show. They love you. I think you have a fan club that has been built up over the last hour or so. Um, and everybody's going to be hitting your blog and stuff like that. So thank you for sharing the time with us. So if you'll stay, you and I will chat for just a second. I'll be back on the channel in just a moment, folks. Thanks a lot. Take care.